And we have Dr. David Bushek and Jenny Shinn. They'll discuss the innovative material and techniques that they're using for wave attenuation over at the Tyndall Airforce Base. Dr. Bushek is a professor of marine and sciences at Rutgers, and he is a shellfish pathologist that also fish laboratory. Dave has studied shellfish ecology and pathology for 39 years, working along the East and Gulf Coast. He is currently leading the Rutgers DARPA Reefense team in developing innovative methods for shoreline protection that involve shellfish reefs. Jenny Shinn is a field researcher at the Haskin Shellfish Laboratory. She primarily assists with implementation and oyster restoration. So welcome, David and Jenny. We look forward about your project, and I will get off screen and let you take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Anita. I just want to check that you can all hear me well, because Anita was coming in and out a little bit. Is my voice okay?
I can hear you fine. If someone can't hear, you can send me a message.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Great.
See some thumbs up.
Great.
So thank you again. We're happy to have this opportunity to talk about the DARPA project. I'm sure many of you have heard various things about it. It's gotten some recent press because we finally moved to installation on it. This first slide here, I just want to highlight that it's a really large team. The folks listed over on the left-hand side are listed alphabetically. So I'm at the top because I'm the PI, but also because my name starts with a B. And then you can see all the institutions that are down here that are cooperating with this. So it's a big project, has about 60 people working on it at any given time. You may have heard a little bit about this from Dr. Kelly Kibler at the University of Central Florida. A year ago, she gave a presentation on some of her work, and the end of that included a bit of what we were hoping to do with this project. So we'll update you on that and provide some more details. All right, let's see, slides aren't advanced. My slides, there we go. Okay, so if you're not familiar with reefense, reefense is a clever play on words to convey the need to protect shorelines at military installations using either coral reefs or oyster reefs as a nature-based solution. DARPA is the Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They work rapidly to develop promising technologies that have applications to help the military remain mission ready. If they're not mission ready, if a storm damages them or something like that, they can't perform their duties towards the security of what they need to do. They've found that with increasing storms and erosion and whatnot, that they're becoming more and more susceptible to these sorts of things. And so reefense is designed to integrate structural engineering, reef health, and adaptive biology to address things like sea level rise and the problems that are coming with that. They've identified this sort of lofty goal here to develop a self-healing hybrid biological and engineered reef mimicking structure to mitigate coastal flooding, erosion, and storm damage. That's not unlike what many of us are doing with living shorelines or other nature-based solutions. They're just jumping on board and hoping to advance it. The program is a 5-year program. We're halfway through that now. It operates in 3 phases. Phase 1 is complete. It was to design, develop, and lab test various components of the project. Phase 2 is where we're trying to deploy the first 50-meter long structure and test its efficacy along the shoreline. And then phase 3, we're going to learn from that and extend the structure another 50 meters and hopefully work towards commercialization. And by that, I mean, DARPA doesn't really intend this to just be for military installations only. They see this as something that they can advance and use more broadly than that. Many of their programs are done that way. They were involved in developing things like GPS technology, which obviously has military uses, but also has everyday uses for all of us. And also things like the COVID vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, they were involved in supporting the development of that, which obviously also has broad application beyond the military. Okay, so here's what they said they wanted to do: integrate structural engineering, reef health, and adaptive biology to address sea level rise. In phase one, they had 3 technical areas that they asked us to work on. The first was substrate design and structure, which involved the materials and the actual physical shape of a structure. The next one was ecosystem engineering, so how can we get the biology and ecology involved in that? And the last one is adaptive biology. So how are the organisms that are going to create these reefs adapt to a warming climate and other things that they might face, such as increasing levels of disease? So in phase 2 and 3, they tried to combine those in a more holistic method with an aim of creating self-sustaining healthy reefs within a decade. That's their overall goal. It's a 5-year project, and there's a decade listed there, so there's a little bit of a misalignment there, but they want us to work as fast as we can to do that. And in this realignment, they have asked us to address shoreline protection, durability, and cost, and then they tried to fold in the 3 technical areas within those. And you can see here on this slide the various metrics that they want us to try and achieve within that within the program. For our part, this was what we proposed. You may have seen this before. I think it was in Kelly's talk. But we proposed something we call a mosaic oyster habitat for coastal defense. So the idea is that the living shoreline or the nature-based solution is not just one kind of habitat together, but it's a bunch of them that work together. So sometimes you might see a breakwater that has marshes behind it, or seagrasses, or rib mussels helping with those out. And in our sort of theoretical construct here, we consider that all to be one structure. They're not independent parts. They're all parts working together for a larger whole, if you will. So if you work your way around on these numbered components here, we begin with a structure. This is a low carbon concrete that's hopefully going to provide some enduring resilient structure. We also have been working with our team in Australia to develop a biodegradable concrete. So once the reef forms, the concrete can go away. These structures have components of them that try to enhance recruitment and deter predation, both at the micro scale and at the macro scale. At the macro scale, though, we're focused mostly on attenuating these waves, so knocking these waves down so that the structures behind them and habitats behind them can develop. As far as the adaptive component, we've been using genomic selection to breed oysters for dermal disease resistance and temperature tolerance. So I'll get into a little bit of that. And then we have this habitat mosaic component. So we're looking at what are the key flora and fauna that need to be part of this structure here, not necessarily just the breakwater structure, but also all these habitats behind it that connect it to the shoreline. So that's what got us moving forward. Where we're working, and one of the reasons why we're speaking to you all in PERT, is that we're working in your neck of the woods in the Florida Panhandle at Tyndall Airforce Base. We are specifically working at this site here called Baker Point. Baker Point has one of the longest fetches along here, and so it's one of the places where we anticipate having the most wave action. We didn't know this site when we were asked to submit a proposal. This was assigned to us after our proposal was accepted, so that was a little bit of a difficult chore. When they first described this, I was a little bit worried that they were going to have us working out on the Gulf shore here, but I'm very happy to know that they were wise and put us in the back bays where the oysters actually grow. I've had a number of people, well, before I move on, I want to say we really appreciate all of the local knowledge and folks that have helped us with other work that's happening in the area and the region. So here you see a picture of us taking a tour around with a couple of folks from your area, Katie Conchard, Jessica Graham, and others, Christina Cantrell, that were showing us some of the other projects happening in the area And that was very helpful in helping move things along and us getting oriented to this particular site very quickly. A number of people have commented during our project as, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel or something like that? We didn't set out to try and reinvent the wheel. It was really a DARPA objective for us to try and find out what's the best way to either use existing materials or develop new materials that can make all of this living shoreline and work happen. And so we've looked at a lot of these things and have tried to incorporate concepts from them in what we're doing and moving forward. So the program from DARPA is really trying to get ahead of the curve here. A lot of this innovation has been moving very fast, as many of you know, and faster than the science or even the engineering to keep up with what it is. So DARPA really wants to get ahead of that curve, and that's what the purpose of this project is. All right, so I mentioned earlier we had 3 technical areas, and our first one was to develop some materials here. And so we have Rick Ryman and Hani Nassif at Rutgers and Raquel San Nicolas and her team over in Melbourne working on developing different types of concrete materials or cements. As I said, one that is low carbon footprint, so that's reducing the amount of carbon that it takes. In fact, they've reduced that by about 60% over the traditional Portland cement that is most commonly used around the world. And that's important because concrete and cement production globally is somewhere in the order of 10% of the total CO2 production worldwide. So reducing that is important, and they've achieved a reduction of about 60% in the manufacturing and production of anything that you want to make with that. On the other hand, there's a large interest to create things that are biodegradable that aren't going to be there permanently, and so that's where Raquel San Nicolas has been working. And here you see some of their work. Ooh, did that just go away? Are my slides still showing?
No, they're not. I can see your sea scallop background.
Okay, how did that happen? Swap disk with these.
It says you're sharing, so
okay. How is that?
Perfect.
Good.
Okay, there we go. All right. So over here on the right-hand side, you see some of the biodegradable materials. They have a biodegradable granule here, and it's this interface here with the mortar matrix that starts to degrade that you can see here. And this has been designed to last for about 15 to 20 years time frame in which we think a healthy, mature reef would form, and then this would start to go away, and the reef would have a self-sustaining structure at that point, and not need the concrete and the cement to hold it together any longer. While they were doing that, one of the things that DARPA does in this accelerated program is everybody has to work on all components of the project all at once. So we really can't wait for somebody to test something to then move on with something else. So while that was happening, another set of team members were working, led by Alex Goad at Reef Design Lab, were working on what such a module or what such a structure would look like. So he was looking at things like reef balls and oyster castles and things like that and trying to figure out, okay, what are we trying to do? He worked with a team at the University of Western Australia who was understanding the hydrodynamics and how waves are attenuated. And so they had this list of criteria you see here that they were trying to address, and then they wanted to optimize what they could do in terms of how well would it perform in the environment. And so they had a whole slew of iterations that they went through. What they finally ended up with looked like this. And so some of you may have seen this in other presentations, but this is what we call our Reefense module. It's about 60 centimeter. It's about a 60 centimeter cube, if you will. So it's not quite a cube. There's an angle on the sides here you can see. There are holes in it. The holes are offset so that it will help with that wave and current attenuation. I'll pull the energy out of that. It had to be designed so that you could have a place to pour concrete in here. You can adjust these angles. There's a solid base, but you can actually extend this open area in the center down if you want to improve anchoring in there. They initially, we proposed to 3D print this, but the cost to do that and the technology to do it rapidly was not quite there yet. So we've returned to casting. And so in that process, we created a 5-part mold that you see here. And here it is being demolded after it's been there, but the top needs to again be open since it's being cast so that you can pour the concrete in there. This technology has been worked out with commercial companies now, and this is what the final product looks like. We then took those and scaled them down so that we could work in a wave flume. And this is at the University of Western Australia again. They have a wave flume tank here. And we started to think about, okay, if we're going to deploy these, what do we want them to look like? And so we had 4 basic configurations here. We did 15 different layouts of those, changing the width and the height and things like that. A bunch of different water levels. All in all, about 500 different tests were performed on these using a 20-year return period of extreme wave conditions at mean sea level that were specifically the 20-year period for Baker Point. So the Army Corps of Engineers did a study and identified what those wave heights would be, and they set the parameters that we had to meet. And in phase 1, DARPA told us we had to meet at least 70% wave attenuation. You can see there's several here that did that. And in phase 2, we're supposed to meet 90%, and you can see we have a couple up here that do that as well. So we're pretty happy with this and are working on moving this forward. As that was happening, and once we started to figure out these designs a little bit, we started wondering, okay, how are they going to work in production here? And I don't know, Jenny, were you going to present this or?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
So in thinking about how would the reef shape affect oyster settlement, we performed some experiments in an annular flume pictured at the bottom there. So the lid and the flume itself spin and it creates a current inside. So we ran this experiment 4 times using 3 arrays of miniature modules that were at a 1/10 scale. So they were 6 centimeters tall at the tallest in 3 different configurations across the top there, what we called the valley that had a lower point in the middle, a mountain with a peak, and a plateau array that was straight all the way across. In addition, we also did a control array that were solid filled shapes like a cone. We quantified oyster settlement on the modules after 2 weeks. And if you go to the next slide. There we go. You can see some of the results here. So if you're looking at the figures, you'll see the 4 different arrays, mountain, valley, plateau, and control. The flow direction, so the water that the flow is coming over the modules is from left to right on the screen. The darker the color red there, the more oysters there were in that location along the array. So the oyster settlement differed across the array shape. But relative to flow, oyster density was highest on the back slope of the mountain, as you can see by the darker red colors there behind the peak, near the front slope of the valley, and sort of mixed on the control cones. Was higher a little bit on the plateau in the front as well, relative to the water flow. Another team at the Rutgers Engineering Department is working on some computational fluid dynamics modeling of these same systems that we experimented with. And they can confirm areas where there's rapid changes in water velocity, and it correlated really nicely to our observations of where we had highest oyster density. So we're hypothesizing that the oysters settled in these positions among these arrays because of that observation. We're just thinking about how this might translate to reef shapes as built at our site in Florida, but also others as well. Next slide.
Okay, so one of the things that we realize is going to happen is that as the oysters grow, they're going to start to occlude this, and we actually saw that happening from this experiment that Jenny just described here. So this was just a envisioning of that by our designers of these units. And then this is in reality what we saw on those small scale flumes. You can kind of get an idea of how small these ones were. That's a hand in there holding this one up here, but this is about a month or two of growth on there. And so we had some of these out in the field that we were able to work with and take images of. And these are 3D prints of something that was derived from this. Up above that, at Western Australia, they were also going forward before we did all of this, and building modules that occluded everything and demonstrated what might happen as the oyster reef becomes colonized and becomes a solid structure. So that's happening now. We took some of the modules. These are a little bit larger than the ones we just described, so they're not 1/10 scale. These are half scale, so they're 30 centimeters on a side, and deployed them again in this mountain, valley, and plateau array that you see here. And we just wanted to see how they performed in the field. And so basically, did they shift much? How did they tolerate wave action and those sorts of things when they were put together here? The modules are designed to, as you can kind of see here, they have these curved edges on the bottom. So those are to help them interlock to create some stability on here. And we just were testing that. But we also did it ahead of the recruitment season so that we could see what recruitment might look like actually in the field, since we just did a laboratory study. And here's the kind of recruitment that we got to them at this particular site. Now, this is a high recruitment area, so we expected to see some recruitment on there, but we were really pleased to see almost uniform cover on these. And we only saw a little bit of shifting. They were pretty stable here. This is a much higher energy environment than St. Andrew Bay, but we did see some scour that was observed. And so the scour was a little bit concerning to us, particularly we'd see it on the edges here. So we went back to the University of Western Australia, where they have a facility called an O-tube. So that this O-tube shown here circulates water through here. This glassed-in area, you can put a sediment bed in there, and you can build what you want to test it in there. And so we did this to look at what the effects of scour were going to be like, as you can see here. They did video observations and 3D laser scanning of the scour evolution, and you can see it here on the corners here on these leading edges. So this was a problem that we knew we needed to address, and we found that we could easily address it and take care of it using something that's commonly used in these areas, and that's just shell bags. So they created shell bags that were of the appropriate scale here, and we could line them up along the leading edge there and take care of all that scour and the settling of these. So it's very, very effective to work this way. In addition to that, we also have a sloping edge. So we're going with that mountain array. I didn't mention that earlier, but the mountain array also helps with the scour as well. So what about using these shell bags? They can be a concern now, particularly plastic is not something people want to use in the environment. So Jenny's been doing some experiments here. She'll pick back up again.
Yeah, we've been looking at these non-plastic or bioplastic alternatives, and we've been running a lab experiment that's been going on for about 18 months now with 3 salinity treatments. We have a freshwater treatment, a full-strength seawater at 32 for us, and a 15. And we also have field experiments going on at a few different field sites in our area, New Jersey, and one in Pennsylvania at a freshwater site. We're testing the ocean harvest bag, which is cellulose. Jet net is cotton and natural rubber, a bees type 1, and a biopolymer sold by Intermoss. So we are looking at the bees type 2 now as well, but that was not included in these primary experiments. Next slide, please. Some general results here of our observations. So the ocean harvest bag is the first one there in line. Within about 2 weeks, it was no longer holding its weight if you picked it up with the shell bag, and it was 75% degraded after just over a month really. The net jet is the second photo there in the field that lasted about a month until no longer containing shell. The bees type 1 has been doing pretty good, similar to the Intermoss biopolymer as well. So after about 16, 17 months, we are starting to see some degradation in the lab with some holes and ripping. So we're still looking at these materials to track them longer, but likely going to use a combination of a couple of them at the site and shout out to those of you who I've been asking for your observations as well that are looking at these bags in warmer water conditions than New Jersey. Next slide. So in thinking about, okay, we know we want to put shell bags for scour, what can we make them out of? We're also looking to make these smaller habitat module designs that go in between the breakwater and the shoreline for different habitat types to be provided to mussels and others. So we're looking at how we can configure these half-scale modules and shell bags to make some of these smaller habitats in the lee of the breakwater. It's a little hard to see in the photos because the modules are already colonized by oysters. We reused them from the photos Dave just showed, but just wanted to note that we're working on some different design ideas for these supplementary components to all work together. And we're working with Franklin's Promise and Senac Oyster Company to make shell bags for the larger part of the project and also for the scour protection.
So as all of that was going on, Kelly Kibler, this is some of the stuff she presented last time, has been looking at the sort of general morphology and reef shape that we see in Florida oyster reefs in general. So she's been looking at the overall shape here that you can see. She's also been looking at the fine scale reef canopy topography using laser scanning to figure out, what's the canopy height like, what's the rugosity, what's the fractal dimensions, all those sorts of things. And then she's also been looking at various densities of oyster reefs to figure out how they affect velocity and sediment transport and those sorts of things, like others have tried to do in the field. So we're hoping to use this information to help identify some of what's the best way to shape these things that Jenny was just describing, and also to identify how well the structure, once it becomes colonized, performs relative to a natural reef that might exist in the area. All right, so another question that we had was where exactly we're going to place this the breakwater structure on there and these other components to it. And we had an idea that we wanted this to be at mean sea level, so we went and started looking at the NAVD 1988 water levels there, taking them from Panama City. But what we learned was we had done some pre-monitoring actually before anything was installed. These are data from that, and we found that, okay, the water depth out here is much different than it is at the Panama City tide gauge. Some of that is due to changes in sea level rise since they had set their sea levels at that tidal gauge, and some of it is due to the distance from the station that we are as well. And so we found that we had to adjust things here. So if we look at the measured level at the NOAA station, and when we compare it to what we saw there, we find that we're going to have to shift things inshore quite a bit to get the same elevation there. So things are happening rapidly, as many of you know, with sea level rise and other changes, and it's important to make sure that you get that right so that you know where you're going to locate things to have the right level of impact. So with that, we started all those information. We started putting together. We came up with a design that we wanted to test for our main structure, and this is what's being deployed now out at the field. And so we have these three, people are calling them chevrons, sort of wing shapes that are out here. We're putting this in underneath one of the existing, I guess, the Jaxbo Army Corps districts biological, I can't remember what the name of, biological opinion that allows living shorelines to go in with an accelerated permitting. So in that, you have to have these gaps in here every 75 feet for manatees. Otherwise, you have to go through the individual permit process. And then we put these small structures behind here. There'll also be ones on either end to help with that. So we have these gaps in here for manatee requirements, and then we're plugging them a little bit behind here to help for the wave energy that's going to come through here. In this picture, the dark areas are tall, 60 centimeter high modules. The gray are 3/4 height, so they're 45 centimeters, and then the lower one, the white ones are only are half height, so they're only 30 centimeters. And that creates this slope here. So we want a slope on all sides of this up to a reef crest. And that's based on some of the work that Kelly Kibler did to get that dimension. Moving on, we are looking at the ecosystem engineering aspect. This is the mosaic habitat component. So the first thing we did was a site survey. Basically, anywhere you're going to work, I think many of you know this, you need to know what's the palette, of species, both plant and animal, that you can use to work with that might be helpful in mitigating erosion and stabilizing the shorelines. And we found all of the normal players that you might expect to be there. So things like Spartina patens and Alterniflora and Juncus rumariensis and Haliduli wrightii. There were things like dead branches around and things like that where we saw evidence of erosion in there. So all of these are forming the things we want to work with. One of the things that was surprising to those of us that work up here in New Jersey was what we thought was initially an absence of rib mussels. We couldn't find any rib mussels colonizing Spartina alterniflora, which grows in this sandy environment here. And then as we looked a little bit more thoroughly, we found that yes, in fact, rib mussels are there, but they're in the Juncus primarily, where we have the muddier sediments in here. And so the association that we describe up this way a lot of Spartina with rib mussels is down in this area is with Juncus actually. And that was discovery by our partners at the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary at the time, and Danielle Krieger and her team who identified this. So with that, we then wanted to mark out where we need to put these habitats. And so we went in and identified the zones at which these are growing. And that's what you see here. So this is a little bit of an exaggerated profile. This is about where the breakwater is going to be. And then subtidally here, we'll have some SAV and some shellfish recruitment. Then we get into the Spartina alterniflora, the Juncus and the patens. And so we'll use this to inform where we want to plant and develop these habitats along the shoreline behind the main breakwater structure. While all this is going on, we've been trying to identify what's happening in terms of organisms that are available for recruitment. We don't have a ton of oyster habitat out there, so we've been putting shells out in these cages to keep them away from predators at 3 different elevations and tracking what recruits to that. And primarily it's barnacles and oysters. There's a variety of other organisms that aren't quite as encrusting as those ones are. But here's a spat count you can see for oysters in June and for barnacles as well, and the percent coverage of barnacles. And as you might expect, the oysters are down lower and then decrease as you get higher in the elevation, and the barnacles do just the opposite. So those of you that are familiar with these organisms in the area might recognize those spatial patterns. We've also been working on predator control. So the main predator we were asked to address in this area is the Florida crown conch here. Some folks at MSU working with Eric Sparks, Jaden Akers, a student in his lab, has been looking at predation. And one of the things they've been looking at is what about the gap width in these modules that we make? Should we increase that gap width? Are there different ways we should structure the base? So here's a cone put in here at the base. They've also applied some things that are spike structures around here to see what can happen. These data here are with another predator in the Gulf, the oyster drill Stromanita hemistoma. And what they found was that this oyster drill, really was able to get around all these different mechanisms quite well. But in fact, the crown conch did not like climbing on these structures at all. So just having things elevated off the bottom may be sufficient to decrease crown conch predation. The third aspect of an area that we were supposed to look at was selection and adaptation to changing problems. A major problem, as you all know, in the Gulf is dermal disease, and resistance to dermal disease is important. It's expected that the disease may increase with warming and increases in salinity. And so selective breeding for dermal was one thing they specifically called out for us to do. and then also for faster growth so they colonize more quickly, and resistance to temperature. So this is being led by Shiming Guo and the breeding program here at Rutgers, but also with assistance from Jerome Lapere at LSU and his team that does a lot of dermo disease work. And then the breeding is being done at the Auburn University Shellfish Lab under Scott Reichard's guidance. So this is a schematic here that basically compares phenotypic and genomic selection. So you start out with a population. The green ones are highly resistant, the yellow are moderately resistant, and the red ones are going to die. And if you just do a random selection, you end up with something that's basically identical to what you had previously. You can do a dermal challenge. And if you're going to do this phenotypic process, you basically challenge them. You'd have a bunch of dead that go away, and you end up with survivors. And then you would just breed these survivors, and that's the end of phenotypic selection right there. If we add genomic selection onto this, what we can do is we can map the genomes of both those that, we sample them up here. And then once they've died, if we have them identified, we can look at their genome of the ones that died and look at the genome of the ones that survived, put them through a SNP array here and identify genomic breeding values for them. And then that's the genomic selection process. And in doing that, we can then pick the best parents out of this group here and more rapidly get to a highly resistant population there. So we've been doing that. We're in the third generation now. Here's some data from the second generation here. And what you see over here is cumulative mortality. The blue line is a wild control from the area. And then the yellow line here is a genomically selected one. So you see much less mortality in the genomically selected line. And then here's a phenotypically selected line and a control line as well that are performing about the same. So both those perform better than this, but clearly the genomically selected line is having much less mortality than the wild. So in 2 generations, we're improving the resistance to disease very quickly. The bottom graph down here shows what's happening over time in this population here with the level of dermal disease. So you see there's relatively low mortality here because the disease level is low. As the disease increases to here, you start to see a lot more mortality increase. So we're getting a good response from this program as well. But this is fine. These are aquaculture populations. So the question is, how do you get these out onto the reef? And we'll switch back over to Jenny for a minute, who's been working with a team that's been trying to solve that issue.
Right, thanks, Dave. So we've been trying to identify an efficient and effective way to attach the genomically selected oysters to the reef modules, whether in the hatchery or in the field. So a few of the different things we've tried to have shown here. First is using oyster catcher tufts manufactured by Sandbar Oyster Company and set oysters on them in the hatchery. We then suspended them by strings, and then we can actually hang them inside the cone of the module before it's colonized. And we tried a couple different methods, one just using the string and looping it around the top of the module, and a second by putting the string onto a wooden dowel, and then using another product called C-tack to glue the dowel onto the top of the module. So we're thinking about, like I said, cost effectiveness and labor time in the field, but also effectiveness and how well the oysters will grow. So we're looking at those components, and we also tried setting oysters onto concrete tiles in the hatchery and then gluing them using the C-tack directly onto the modules. I should have put an update photo in here from the last time we were out, but in that bottom photo that the yellow arrow is pointing to, the oysters have grown up over the tile and have actually occluded that whole space on the side of the module. So it seems to be pretty effective for the oysters to be attached in that way. We're continuing to observe that.
All right, well, excellent. So one of the things that I'll say about having this seminar canceled last week is that I was actually able to go down last week and see what's happening. And so I had to change my slide. So my next slide has a little bit of an arrow in it in terms of the animation. So I'll just reveal everything all at once here. But we were able to get all of these modules commercially produced. So we now have precasters that know how to do this, and they can do it very efficiently, ship them down to wherever they need to be. Here they are stored in Panama City for deployment. We're working with H.G. Harder & Sons, a company out here. They began construction on October 21st, a little bit later than we had hoped. We had hoped to have all this done last spring to have the whole summer there, but permitting issues that many of you are probably familiar with delayed us until now. But we're in the water now. Here are some units being lowered. This is the mechanism by which they carry them out there and lower them down. So a full-size unit weighs about 450 pounds, and they can easily move them around with this process here, and had no problem orienting them here. There's a supervisor out there with the plans for how we want them arranged, and here you can see a completed section here that's showing essentially this structure right here. So that's where we are. I just want to end with a big thanks to this really large team. It's very talented and works very hard from all these institutions listed here. The DARPA project management team as well, Catherine Campbell and Jake Goodwin, as well as others that are there. And then they also have an independent verification and validation team that's comprised of folks from the U.S. Army Corps and the USGS, and they're evaluating what we do independent of us. So they're going out there and making measurements on what we do to verify that what we report is actually what they're seeing happen. So with that, if anyone would like to ask any questions, we'd be happy to entertain them.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, if you raise your hand, there's a little hand icon and an arrow. You can click on the arrow and you can raise your hand, and I can see it and call on you. It says react underneath the button. GoToMeeting has changed their platform a little bit, so you may not have seen this before. Joy Brown. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself, Joy, and ask your question.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. Just quickly going back to those last couple of slides and noting that you're getting them out in October, do you have any concerns of reduced spat on those since you're getting them out a little later in the year, or do you feel like that's not a significant issue for you?
So we have been concerned about that. Ideally, we'd want to see this stuff happen in the spring, so we have that full recruitment season. One of the things that we have as a backup plan to that is what Jenny was working on with the different ways to attach selected lines to it, which we could do with unselected lines as well. But we'll learn that as we go along. So we'll get fouled up with other organisms, perhaps. Time will tell.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Give a few minutes for people to think about their questions. I was going to ask you myself about permitting. Any lessons learned there?
I don't know. Permitting is permitting. It's always an ordeal to do. We did find that the Jaxbo option was a pretty good one to go with. If you're going to do something larger than a 75-foot structure, or at least components that are 75 feet, then you have to go through the individual permit process. But just, it's always good to be in touch with the regulatory agencies as much as you can. I'm sure most people know that.
Yeah, that's always takes more time than you think it will, that's for sure. And I had questions about the, you've answered so many of my questions. I had written down some. One of them was about the predation and the design modifications to prevent predation. So anxious to see your success there. And next we have Jessica Black. She had a question. Jessica,
can you hear me?
Okay.
Yep.
I was just curious about the timeline for sharing the commercial precast production with other, I guess, commercial production agencies, or how do we share that knowledge like throughout the region when it becomes available?
That's a good question. I don't know if Hani or Mike are on here, but for the most part, uh, I don't think there's anything that's a secret in there about what they're doing yet. No IP, but the way that they've done this is to work with a precaster that was local, so they could teach them how to make these structures. The precasters we went to found that these structures were complicated. They're not simple cylinders or square boxes that they're used to making, and so they wanted a little bit of advice on them. Some of them outright said this, we don't do that kind of stuff. And the other extreme to that were architectural precasters who, they'll do things like all the fancy, concrete work that you see, decorative stuff on there, and they were very expensive. So this 5-part mold is relatively easy to use. We now have a protocol as to how those precasters will work through this. There are 2 different types of molds that we can make out of different materials. One's more expensive and more durable and would last longer. The other one is cheaper to make, but may only make 50 units before you have to replace it. So there's options like that we'll put out there. I don't know the timeline on it, sorry.
No, that's great. That's just curious, and how it might be able to be used with other groups in the future. So thanks.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I'm also interested in the concrete mixture too. I know we've had a lot of questions come up about that.
Yeah. So just to add that, Jessica, so Hani and Asif and his team are looking at working with some folks that I think want to develop a company analogous to, Oyster Castle or Oyster Catcher, Sandbar, something like that, a reef ball that would start to manufacture these and then sell them. The concrete technology you asked about, Anita, that I think may have some IP in there, and once that's settled, then that'll be released. The modules themselves can be made with any type of material that would work. The cement mixture that we're using is a low carbon one, intended to lower the footprint of the manufacturing process, but it does work fine if you just use standard cement and concrete.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, any more questions?
Joy Brown had a question, another question?
Yeah,
Joy,
yeah, I did have another one about bash concerns. I was looking at the image there that you still got on the screen of the completed section, and I thought you said it was a breakwater. Are they actually sticking up out of the water at the highest tide?
Not at the highest tide. The height of these is designed to be at mean sea level, so they should be exposed at low tide and covered at high tide. Bash is a concern. I don't know, Joy, are you working with TNC?
I did. I'm with a different company now, but I have in the past.
Okay, so TNC has a project at Tyndall as well. Our site has no infrastructure behind it or anything like that to be concerned with. But TNC, and they're working with the base, they were actually specifically asked to protect infrastructure, and in cases where it's a runway, BASH, which stands for Bird Airstrike Hazard, is a concern. And so anything that's emergent that would attract birds, they're concerned if that's around where there's a runway, for obvious reasons. So in that case, they requested that these structures remain subtidal at that particular location. They can still be effective. They're just going to reduce the effectiveness the lower they are. And in our mosaic oyster habitat design, the idea is that as you move onto the shoreline, some of that emergent structure is behind the breakwater, not necessarily the breakwater itself.
Yeah, and I was just interested because I see you're not far from the Red Horse training area. So, and I wasn't sure what is the perimeter of their concern for for bash related to living shoreline kind of
Yeah,
projects, but I guess they are not having an issue with yours because it does seem it's a bit of ways, but it just didn't seem super far, so I wasn't sure.
yeah, yeah. I can ask that question to the base, but I'm pretty sure it was in the direct flight path of the runways.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? I don't see any other hands. So, David and Jenny, we really appreciate it. You did an excellent job. You answered so many of my questions. So,
Thank you.
looking forward to see how the project proceeds. And we'll have you back on again. And hopefully we'll get to meet you in person.
Yeah, we look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, our next PERT webinar is going to be on January 27th. So mark your calendars, and we'll send out the subject in the near future. So thank you, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.